Welcome to the PharmaVOICE Editor's Take video series, recorded live at the DIA 2014 annual meeting in San Diego, hosted by Taryn Grome, editor of PharmaVOICE. In this episode, Taryn meets with Rick Morrison, CEO, Comprehend Systems.
Rick, welcome to the 50th anniversary of the DIA.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Your company started just a few years ago. I'd like to hear from you how technology is transforming the way clinical trials are conducted.
So, if you look across enterprises and companies in general, technology is really changing the world. And it's really also starting to come into our space as well. 15 years ago, all data collection, for example, was done on paper-based data collection systems. Now we've seen a ton of different EDC systems spring up, and there's a whole bunch of new systems that are coming. For example, ePro, EMR, EHRs, bringing in genomic data, and many others. This is happening across our industry, and the advantages are really going to be great, and it's going to be very impactful on how trials are conducted, which you can see with adaptive clinical trials, centralized monitoring, risk-based monitoring, for example. And so what's happening now is we've really laid the groundwork for big change through technology by having all this data now available, by being able to hook into payer information, which is becoming important in EMR. And so we're just really at a point where technology is going to completely change this industry. We've laid the groundwork with all these different data collection systems, but now we're actually going to start seeing the effects of those changes as it becomes more commonplace and as it becomes required, because the pressure on sponsors is greater than it ever has been before. They need to cut costs, they need to be more efficient, and also discover things and be able to improve their processes, and technology will be the catalyst for that.
I think that's a very futuristic view, and it's something that we're hearing more and more often about the changes that technology is going to be bringing about, and you all are at the forefront of that. What are some of the current challenges with data warehousing, and how can these be overcome?
So due to all the different data collection systems that are now in place, companies have realized that the old methods just no longer work. And what they're trying to do now is they're trying to use what's called data warehousing. Data warehousing, the thought behind it is that you develop some form of canonical ontology that ideally will be able to encapsulate all the data that you need. You then go to all of these different systems that are now in place, and you move that data to this data warehouse. And the thought is that the data warehouse will then be able to give you real-time insights. Now, just logistically, data warehousing is not a new technology. It's been used for quite a long time in fields like manufacturing, where you build your manufacturing plant, you put your systems in place, and nothing changes for 10 years. But in our industry, there's so much money every single year being spent on collecting and curating new data sets as new studies come online, as things change, that the underlying fundamentals are just always in motion, and therefore a data warehouse just can't really adapt to this. And this is where we're really seeing a lot of companies try this and fail, because they're not able to get the real-time insights that they need from that, and they're not able to actually get the real-time answers that the entire promise of the data warehouse has promised, which just never comes through to fruition. The other big problem with this is that it's a very long undertaking. So there's a huge capital expense just to get started. You'd have to invest several $1 million just to start developing this ontology, just to be able to start making it, to start the implementation, and you're not going to know for a couple years whether or not it's worked. And in practice, what happens is a couple years later, the requirements have changed, you're starting over, and it's this never-ending loop of basically retrying. And so from our perspective, we see a lot of companies that have basically given up on data warehouses and are looking for something new.
Rick, I think those are very compelling insights. Thanks for sharing that view with us. What are the advantages of having a single platform to connect disparate clinical systems to address this data warehousing issue?
So the way I really think about this is these pharmaceutical companies, medical device makers, I mean, they're really bringing in billions of dollars a year revenue. So it's almost like you're driving a multi-billion-dollar yacht, except you're going at high speed, and you don't actually have good telemetry about what's happening around you if you don't understand what's happening in real time. And so this used to be okay because things moved slower, right? When you had a paper-based system and the FDA was okay with that and the consumers were okay with that, it kind of worked. But everybody's really getting accustomed to technology. So everybody, for example, has a very powerful computer on them at all points in time that in their personal life is connecting them with everything and getting them everything that they need. They realize that they should be having the same thing at their jobs. And so this is where we just really see the catalyst of what's the forcing function that's bringing in technology. And what will happen is that companies will be expected to have better telemetry about where their business is going. And the FDA, and for example, in industry, are really pushing adaptive clinical trials and risk-based monitoring, which are fundamentally based on better telemetry and being able to make decisions that in real time that are better. So I think this has to happen. It makes business sense. It's not easy to do, and especially it's not easy when you have things that had worked for decades that are no longer working. But that is the case. And the other really interesting thing that we're seeing is with the new laws, for example, that are being passed in the U.S., that have been passed in the U.S., companies, drug makers, device makers, actually need to be able to prove the feasibility of the payment for their treatments earlier. They'll need to be able to actually start working more with the payers and start working more with hospitals to really understand what's happening. And that's something that's been completely different than they've ever had to worry about before. There's a lot of companies that are already shutting down potentially promising devices or other types of things because of this. The solution for sponsors, the solution for our entire industry is going to be technology based. It's going to be based on understanding what's happening across all of these moving systems that are here to stay, being able to connect this into EMR systems for bringing in patient medical histories, or being able to connect this into payer databases to see kind of what would happen, and it has to happen in order for us as an industry to stay in business. And I'm extremely excited about some of the technology that's available to make this happen. And it's going to be innovative companies that are doing things differently than they've always been done.
Rick, thank you so much for giving us some insights into what the future holds for us and how exciting this is going to be.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me.
Additional Editors Take videos, as well as podcasts, white papers, webinars, and more are available at www.pharmavoice.com.